All right, guys, we are here. It is Stack and Sats segment 2, episode 1. We have a guest, Antoine. So, in the last segment, we talked about Hashrate Heating in a broad sense, and we touched on the philosophy of a heat punk. During today's segment, we are going to interview another heat punk, Antoine. And Antoine is a personal friend of mine. He is the founder of 256 Heat based out of Canada. What he's doing is taking Hashrate Heating and introducing it to small business owners and homeowners and teaching them how they can utilize Hashrate Heating in their homes, in their businesses, and in their lives. So personally, I actually have a Hashrate Heating system that Antoine designed and built for my home. It's been running like a champ since October. Was it when we got it taken care of?
Yeah.
Yep. So, it was an amazing thing. And the best part about it is that it's wife approved. My wife absolutely loves it. Every single morning, she's going into the app, turning the heater on and getting herself nice and warmed up. She loves that, she can sit on the couch with the baby and turn the heater on or off depending on her desire. And so it's a great situation. I'm personally in love with the system that you built for me, Antoine. But welcome to the Stack and Sat show. Appreciate you being here today. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Yeah. Busy. This is a busy season for me. So it's been a lot of builds in a short period of time, but that's what I want. That's good because a lot of that kind of work dries up when it gets warmer. So c'est la vie for a heat punk. And I enjoy it. We got a couple of conferences coming up. So just looking to get out there, shake some hands, meet some people, some clients, some partners, potentially some vendors. So it's been busy, but really good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of conferences, I do want to touch on this a little bit because this is a Hashrate Heating episode. Let's talk a little bit about that conference that we have coming up because this is going to come out next week. By the time everybody sees it, it'll be the third or fourth week of January. But in February 21st and 22nd, Antoine and I are going to be at the Undermine HeatPunk Summit in Denver. It's going to be a really great event. It's all about Hashrate Heating and the philosophy and ethos of heat punks. There's going to be a lot of different people there from ASIC manufacturers to hardware developers. We're going to get people like Scott from Scott 9000 from the BitAxe project's going to be out there. We've got people from Brains. I'm kind of blanking on some of the other people that are going to be there, but it's a really great opportunity for anybody who's looking to get into Hashrate Heating or just kind of curious. And I actually did put a episode out on the Build a Mind podcast with Cody Harris, who is one of the event organizers over there. Antoine, you're pretty excited about this event, right?
Oh yeah. Looking forward to it. It's so rare that you get to meet, even one heat punk. So being able to be in a room full of them is kind of a dream. So really looking forward to it. Ocean's going to be there, a bunch of big names. It's just it's a 3-day or I guess 2-day weekend conference, but really looking forward to it. Haven't been to Denver in a long time. It's a nice state from what I remember. Maybe there's some time for some snowboarding. We'll see.
Yeah, if you show up a little bit early, you might be able to hit the mountain. I'm definitely not going to have any time to do that, but that's okay. So it's all good. But if you guys want to get your tickets are going to be selling out. There's only room for about 100 people at the space in Denver, so it's going to be a very small, very close knit, very tight organized event. So definitely make sure that you get your tickets now and don't wait to FOMO in. But anyways, let's get into it. Philosophy of a heat punk, Hashrate Heating, man. Like, tell us. I kind of explained it in the beginning at the first segment of this episode, which came out on Monday. Today is Wednesday when this is being released. Tell us what a heat punk is in your eyes.
Yeah. For me, I think it kind of stems from a love of engineering and efficiency. Being able to take a waste product and turn it into a valuable product is like a dream for any engineer. And the heat reuse is such a great idea just in terms of, let's say you're a Bitcoiner, you love Bitcoin, you want to DCA. This lets you do it at a far lower cost than simply just plugging in a machine and having to deal with the heat as a byproduct instead of a product. So there's so many systems that you can implement, whether it's firmware or hardware or tools to kind of modify the miners to get them more instead of using the fans to cool the chips, and so the chips are kind of driving the show, you're kind of using the ambient temperature. That's the idea behind it. So, the ethos is really kind of just reuse intelligently, decrease your costs, become price insensitive. If these kinds of things appeal to you, then yeah, Hashrate Heating is definitely for you. Kind of takes the long view and allows you to take old hardware that it'd be hard to justify plugging it in right now, and allows you to keep on trucking with an S19J Pro that's 5 or 6 years old, and still do it economically because you're replacing an existing cost. So that's kind of the impetus behind why you would use an ASIC miner to heat a home or business.
Yeah, and I touched on it a little bit. An ASIC miner is just it's just a radiant heater, basically, at the end of the day, and it's a much more efficient way to transfer electrical energy into heat energy. There's a lot of different systems out there that create heat, but a Bitcoin miner is just a much more efficient way of doing that. And then another thing that I touched on in my Undermine HeatPunks episode with Cody, well, I didn't touch on it. Cody had mentioned this, and this was something that really resonated with me, was the fact that HeatPunks, we have all these miners in all these different areas heating different things, different rooms, different places. Maybe it's a water system, maybe it's food storage, or whatever it can be. The cool thing about being a rabbit and a HeatPunk is that if the network needs us, in a time of need, in a time of darkness, somebody starts trying to attack the network in one way, shape, or form, Hashrate HeatPunks have so much hash rate that we could just call upon almost instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
We could overclock our machines. Yeah, we might have to open some doors, open the windows, lift the garage up or something like that. But the amount of hash rate that we can call upon in minutes is almost double than what we're actually running. And that's kind of it's an exciting thought for me, knowing that we, the HeatPunks, are protecting our network, our Bitcoin network that we, live and breathe every single day. Like, we're protecting it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. And something you mentioned, which is kind of interesting, is like, let's say you're not utilizing let's say you have a 120 terahash miner and you're utilizing 90 terahash because that miner's already warmed your house up to a nice level. Well, underclocking is actually hugely beneficial for you just economically, because as you know, miners run more efficiently when they're underclocked. So, having that headroom to go up and respond to heat demand or financial demand. Let's say Bitcoin's ripping, open the windows and turn everything up, right? But just having that optionality is really nice, and it adds to the allure of having a system like that can respond, whether it's to heat, to financial demand. Like, it's pretty flexible that way.
Most definitely. So tell us, how has, you've been in Bitcoin for a little bit now, and you've been playing with Bitcoin mining for a while. How has the Bitcoin mining ecosystem changed over the course of the last few years, especially with the rise of the HeatPunks?
It's become so competitive, and I think there's little good innovation without necessity. A lot of the HeatPunk stuff was pretty muted before the last halving, and then I find now, since the last halving, you basically have a whole generation of miners that are no longer profitable if you're doing it on a purely Bitcoin mining and not a heat reuse basis. So as things get more challenging for the pubcos and the little home miners that are just using their hash rate to mine Bitcoin and no other purpose, no other heating or other secondary benefit, it kind of forces you to innovate, and maybe you have some sunk costs for your infrastructure, and it just requires a few components and some know-how to modify your existing system. That's worth it. That if you can cut your heating bill, even if you can cut your heating bill in half, if you have a long view of the Bitcoin kind of savings technology thesis, then that 50% reduction in your bill eventually will become a free bill, will become a very profitable heating bill. So that's been my experience, and that's been anyone's experience who's mined for over 4 years. So, these things will ROI. Just have to kind of sit on the corn for a while and let it do its thing. But that's kind of the least interesting part of it. The whole technical aspect, the firmware, the tuning, kind of right sizing things, getting miners responsive to demand. Meaning, if it's cold, you want them running high. If it's warm, you kind of want them running low. I've done different systems in the past where you prioritize uptime, and that's good. But if you're a miner that has old hardware, which is quite a few of my clients, or someone who wants to dip a toe into the space, you know, a large sticker price is kind of shocking and kind of deterring to a lot of people. And that's the only way you could really justify a 100% uptime rig. You know, something S19 or S21 or S19K Pro or sorry, probably XP. It's really hard to find anything profitable that's older than that. So yeah, the ability just to kind of take junk and turn it into gold is what appeals to me on like a financial level, but also like an engineering and kind of efficiency level.
Yeah, there's definitely something to the fact that like we're competing in a different way. You know,
Yeah.
obviously we don't have the access to the amount of hash rate, the amount of power that these large pubcos have. But, you know, there's an argument to be made, as Bob Burnett would say, the rabbits are much more versatile in the way that they can shut on and off, the way that they can disperse, they can pick up and move to other locations. And so I really do believe that the heat punks, you know, us small rabbits, we are competing in our own small way, finding these different ways to utilize heat in parts of our lives so that we can become price insensitive, as you had mentioned before.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to touch on your business model, because you have a very interesting business model that you've created over the last what is it, a year or two? It's been a year, right?
Yeah, it's been just under a year. Yeah,
Just
basically.
under a year.
Yeah.
So you have an interesting business model, and you go out, you speak to plebs, you speak to no coiners, you speak to people who are interested in Bitcoin, and you teach them about hash rate heating. Explain how this business model came to you and what it's been like building a business in the hash rate heating space of Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. So I guess when I started kind of experimenting and doing some R&D to figure out what was the most viable business model going forward, like I said in the beginning of this interview, I tried that 100% uptime model where, you know, it required new hardware, quite a bit of ducting, and you know, high operating costs, but also high capital costs. So started with that, had some resistance, had to retool, did that over the summer, experimented with ways to use older hardware. I noticed after the halving, especially, most of the interest that I was getting from clients or potential clients at that time was, hey, I've got some old S19Js sitting in a corner. They're, you know, they're bookends or they're door stops right now. I'd love to be able to use them to heat my home. What do I need to do? And I think that was kind of like the aha moment when I saw how much demand there was for kind of that application. So what I did was I retooled the system to kind of throttle down on the demand. So if you didn't need all that heat, there's huge benefit to downclocking. As I mentioned earlier, it's more efficient to run your miner. If it's a 3,000 watt miner, it's more efficient to run it at 2,000 watts than it is 3. So if you don't need the heat, you want to keep your bill down. It kind of just reprioritizes how I thought about Hashrate Heating. And it was a good model. Became a lot more popular this winter than it was last winter. It was a lot more people who were trying to recycle, like I said, recycle old hardware, or they had no idea about any of this stuff. They didn't realize that it was profitable, especially like here in Canada. We have pretty cold temperatures and cheap power. They didn't know it was profitable, but they didn't want to spend $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 on a system. So if you can take your biggest expense is usually your miner, and if you can take your miner from like a $3,000 or $4,000 expense to a $500 expense, well, now it kind of makes sense. And yeah, you're getting half the hash rate. You're doing it at a fifth of the cost. So and there's interchangeability. So if your miner needs to be upgraded 2, 3, 4 years down the road, it's not like you have to retool your infrastructure. Your infrastructure can be recycled. And right now we're 3 generations behind backwards compatible. So until we get to the S21 XP Pro, everything works, and it can be used for any of the Bitmain Antminer S19 series and S21 series. So that's really cool. And then again, just to go up to the S21 Pro XP, it's just different intake shroud. So, you know, again, almost all of it, 95% of it can be reused. So I like that modular approach to building these systems, and everything interchangeable, everything off the shelf can be ordered and, you know, received in a couple days. Nothing really too proprietary because except for the 256 Wi-Fi PDU switch, but everything else can just be bought. So if anything kind of dies on you, it's an easy replacement. And you don't have to be an expert to do it. Almost everything can be done by someone who has very little experience and just can read a few instructions or watch a tutorial video, or like I walk through a lot of clients through these things myself. So yeah, pretty low bar, which is nice about those air-cooled systems.
Yeah, I'll be honest, guys. Your host is not the most intuitive, I guess. I mean, I'm a contractor, but man, sometimes I feel like I'm kind of thick-skulled. So if I can build a system that Antoine, you know, shipped to me, I can piece it together, I can build it, then I know the majority of you can as well. And most of you that can't, it's only because you just don't have the desire to. So if you have a desire to build one of these systems, it can be done. I want to let you talk about the 256 Heat Wi-Fi switch. Because this is an incredible piece of technology that I remember, you know, when we first set up my system, you didn't have a UL listed certified piece. And now you can just sell these Wi-Fi PDU switches straight off your website, just the Wi-Fi PDU switch itself. And this is a pretty big movement for you and for your business. But tell people what this switch does and how they can implement it into their builds.
Yeah, so just to correct one little thing, it's CSA approved. All the components are UL listed, but I don't have UL approval. So okay. CSA is kind of like the Canadian UL equivalent. So there's some equivalencies there, but just not to be pedantic, but slight difference. Either way, yeah, it works. They work great. They the switches were, you know, I had to upgrade quite a few components and add a couple things to get from where I was with my like first kind of prototypical R&D switches that I've made. Sorry, what was the question again? I'm getting a little.
So I'd like you to just kind of explain what the Wi-Fi PDU switch is and why it's such a big improvement to people's systems.
Yeah. So the basic kind of necessity for why I designed this or why I needed it for myself was I wanted to be able to access my miners from anywhere. But then once I achieved that, once you had access to your miners through your phone or whatever interface, it became pretty obvious that you could integrate a number of sensors. And some of those sensors, like temperature sensors, you could use to have some safety redundancies on the miner. So if you place one of these temperature sensors right over the PSU side of the miner, which will magnet right onto it, it will, if anything starts to arc or overheat in there, it'll automatically cut the power. So that's kind of nice for peace of mind. The other thing is you can run multiple sensors. So you can have that and or another sensor in, like, let's say your main living space where your thermostat would be for your HVAC system. And once your house starts heating up, you can have that sensor tell the PDU switch to cut power. So you can introduce some like kind of smart programmability into how the miner runs. But that's kind of like the granular kind of overall control. The miners will also respond to heat. So the way I like to look at it is you have various gears, and then inside of those gears, you have RPMs. And that's kind of the easiest way to look at it. So the way that the switch ties into this is kind of like the fail-safe redundancy, and also just for access. You know, if you want to reboot it, or if you need to, you know, integrate a motion sensor, so you have a certain temperature range when you're there and another temperature range when you're not there. You can really create some pretty. You can layer, you can layer kind of commands on top of each other to really get like a finite control over when your miner runs, how your miner runs, safety features, all of that stuff. So it's really for those who kind of, they want to have like the functionality of like a switched PDU, but it's done at like a third of the price for a typical Switch PDU. And then you get all the additional Wi-Fi functionality on top of it, which you wouldn't with a Switch PDU. So like the temperature sensors and other sensors you can integrate.
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely love my Wi-Fi PDU switch, man. It's incredible, and I'm barely using half the functionalities of this thing, man. I'm literally just using two temperature sensors. It turns on when it gets below a certain range, and it turns off when it gets above a certain range. Sometimes I turn it on again because it's colder, and whatever. But either way, like, what you've built here is an incredible device with a lot of usability for simpletons like myself. Could you just tell us, you're deeply entrenched in the HeatPunk space. You're deeply entrenched in Hashrate Heating, like I am myself. Where do you see the future of Bitcoin mining going with the implications that Hashrate Heating brings?
It's probably going to help decentralization. Um, there's a lot of incentive to anything that's electric resistive, to convert that to something that creates hashing and electric resistive heating. Not to sidetrack too much, but I was just looking at I was dropping my kids off at school, and I was looking at the house beside where I parked the car, and there was your typical HVAC vent where you have your cold air in, and then it goes into a combustion chamber, which heats up a heat exchanger, which the AC blower blows that air through. So you're essentially creating fire inside your house. So you're sucking air in, you're creating combustion, you're warming up metal, and then you have to exhaust that hot air, that combustion air out, right? You can't let fumes into your home. And I was just thinking like how inefficient that is by like, I mean, most furnaces are 93% efficiency, but like even that, when you're looking at a hash rate heater, all of the electricity gets converted to heat, like pretty much 99% of it, right? There's very little, the heat is converted into very little else except, or the electricity is converted to very little else except for heat. So just looking at that, and then obviously you need to weigh the pros and cons. If you're in a place that isn't very cold and has extremely cheap natural gas, maybe hash rate heating isn't your thing. But there are a lot of places, and I was just looking at the data on this. So many people heat with like heating oil, which is diesel, which is very expensive to have delivered. Propane, again, most of what you're paying is for the delivery and the storage. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of cases that it really makes sense. And going forward in the future, it's not going to be hard for manufacturers of appliances that produce low-grade heat to integrate some sort of ASIC chip, whether it's like a small scale like the BitX, or whether it's there's actually water cooled units now that are kind of designed to be heaters, and they're like I think they're like 15 kilowatt or petahash per unit. So you're getting more and more choices with regards to the scale of your heating requirements. So it's cool to see, and I think it's going to continue. I think you're going to see, especially like the manufacturers of electric resistive heaters, there's really this is like, if you can get into that early, you can kind of kill all your competition, because you can give your clients a return on their investment, which is before it was just consuming costs and just giving them heat. Now you can offer them the best money in the world. So it really makes sense for these some of these manufacturers to start integrating chips.
Yeah, and we've seen. I don't know if the audience is familiar, but Canaan just released at CES this year. They just released a baseboard style hash rate heater. I mean, it plugs into 120 volt. It can be optimized for 220 volt depending on what you have, and it's like 37.5 terahash. Now, I'm not a huge Canaan fan, but what I'm getting at here is that you have an ASIC chip manufacturer who is now manufacturing heaters, like specifically designed heater.
Yeah.
So for me, what does this say when the chip manufacturers of our ASICs, all the ASICs that we use are manufactured by like 3 or 4 different companies? What does this mean when these companies are now competing for the HeatPunk's business? I mean, most of us we're operating in a vacuum. We're building inside of our own garages, just tinkering and DIYing stuff. And that's awesome. I am wholeheartedly in, like, for that It's great. But there is a whole subset of people who aren't DIY. They aren't tinkerers. They aren't, they don't want to go and try to build this heater and implement it into their home. So what does that mean when they can just go and purchase an off-the-shelf unit, plug it in, and connect it to Wi-Fi, and they're hashing and heating their homes?
Yeah, I think it just means, they're starting a trend. I think that's just, like I said before, there's so much incentive to do so if you live in certain jurisdictions where you have cheap power and it's cold, or if you have no other alternatives where the power is expensive and or you're at altitude and the propane or natural gas combustion is not as efficient. So there's lots of use cases for it. One of the things just personally that I'm doing to get around some of the, let's say you're non-technical, one of the things I'm playing with now is just kind of shipping a complete kit. So I build it all in house and I ship something that can basically have 4 screws bolted onto the wall and ducted in. So that's an option. I do see like that's really clever that what Canon did with their baseboard heater. And I think a plug and play option makes a lot of sense because you have a much larger addressable market. And it's a way to get people into it, right? You can preach to fellow Bitcoiners, and that's awesome, and they get it, and it's easy. But if you can take someone that's not a Bitcoiner and make them a Bitcoiner via Hashrate Heating, that's going to be a really strong connection to it. They're gonna defend the network and not just the number go up kind of proposition. So I always kind of preach interact with the hardware, build the node, use Lightning. You don't really understand the power of Bitcoin if your entire thesis is number go up. So I've always this is a great way to get dip a toe, especially if it's 120 volt. Anyone can just plug one of these things in and be like, okay, how do I connect to a pool? Okay, now how do I store my Bitcoin? Now, how do I really store it long term? Like it sends you down the rabbit hole. It's a good way to dip a toe and then get sucked in to the whirlpool.
100%.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wrap it up here. One more thing. What is your last piece of advice for anybody who is looking at Hashrate Heating, looking at the HeatPunk space, and kind of starting to think like, I want to get into this?
Do your research. I arrived kind of where I am with how I think about things because of just tons of research and reading. Things get a lot more clear when you look further into them, and it's quite the rabbit hole. So do your research, but also don't stop there. Also kind of throw things at the wall and see what sticks, which kind of would be like buy hardware, and even if you don't have the infrastructure, even if you don't know what you're doing, buy the hardware and then figure it out. That's for me, at least, that was the best way to do it, because when you have skin in the game, you will pay more attention. You will be more incented to kind of follow through with things. So don't be afraid to purchase an old S19J Pro and then figure out how to power it, figure out how to get Ethernet cable to it, figure out how to get it onto a pool. Don't be afraid. And then the other thing is the community is extremely helpful. It's been helpful to me. I enjoy helping people. You'll find if you have questions, legitimate questions in the Bitcoin mining space, you'll get lots of answers on Nostr or Twitter pretty quickly, and they'll be the best answers. You can look through forums and find incorrect information, but Twitter's pretty good at getting good information quickly from trusted sources. So I just got on Nostr, so I have to start playing with that more, but I figured it would be a good thing to do before the conferences.
For sure. Well, thank you, Antoine. I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to our audience. With that, this has been segment 2, episode 1 of the Stack and Sat show. Remember, guys, to always keep stacking. Thanks, Antoine.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was great talking with Antoine, getting his perspective, talking about why he got into Hashrate Heating, why he built a business around Hashrate Heating. I hope we framed out what Hashrate Heating is so that you have a better understanding moving forward. Like I said earlier in the week, a lot of the show is going to be focused around Hashrate Heating builds, things like immersion, things like hydro. We're going to talk about things like the Loki rig, the bit chimney, the stealth miner. These are all different types of builds that generate heat. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. But you guys know what to do. If you guys liked this episode, if you liked what we're doing here, please like, subscribe, comment, leave a leave a review. And if you feel so inclined, donate to the show. We would really appreciate that as it helps us going forward. So with that, we will see you guys on the next episode of the Stack and Sats podcast. We're going to dive into free and open source software. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. And until next time, keep stacking, everyone.